Damn, it's good to see you. Been a short summer, hasn't it? But welcome back. We're going to do it again this year, and keep coming. I still need names for people, so if you've got somebody in mind, like give me a name, you can always build a file. Colonel Precourt came in to make a presentation for Thiokol, and got excited about our place a little bit. He liked some of our old airplanes, and we tabbed him to be our kickoff speaker. And you know what? This guy's got quite a history. And I'm going to let you tell him. I said, I'm not going to take any time. And so, Colonel, the hour's yours, and you just run it any way you want to. And when you're done, we'll go home.
All right, very good. Did you hear me in the back without the microphone? And tell me. No? You want me to use the microphone? You prefer the microphone?
Yes.
Everybody tries it. Everybody tries it, and it's always a no. Okay. Well, I'll make it a little informal by pinning the microphone around the corner here. I'm really pleased to be with you this afternoon. We're new to the area. My wife and I moved here in June. I started work with ATK Thiokol in March, commuted from Houston for a few months, and I'm really pleased to be up here and enjoying Utah. I guess today is maybe the turn of the weather for the season, but that's okay. My wife wanted to move away from Houston because she wanted some weather and not the humid, rainy thunderstorms that they get all year round down there. So we're really pleased to be here. And I consider myself extremely fortunate to have had the privilege of flying 4 missions in space on the Space Shuttle. And one of the better things that we get to do is share that experience. I'd like to do a little bit of that with you today. I'm Air Force by career. I left the Air Force Academy in 1977. Was in training command for 3 years, flew T-37 and T-38, teaching guys that I guess you could call them young. They were only a couple of years younger than I at the time, but put a lot of students through flight school and then went to the F-15. I flew in Germany for 3 years, and then they sent me off to Edwards, which is where I'd always wanted to be. And I spent 5 years there doing flight tests, primarily on the F-15 still. The F-15E model emerged right before the Gulf War. And in 1987 through 89, I flew all the initial workup tests on that airplane. The first Mach 2 flight on it, a lot of the engine development tests on it. It looks a lot like the irregular F-15, but it was, on the insides, it was completely different. So it was a lot of fun to bring that airplane online and see it do so well in the Gulf War. While I was there, of course, a lot of my colleagues left and went to NASA. And I followed suit and joined the space program in 1990. I had 4 shuttle missions. The first was on Columbia, on a laboratory mission that was sponsored by the Germans. And we flew in 1993 for 10 days and did 90 some odd medical experiments. And our 2 German specialists that flew with us turned themselves into human guinea pigs for 10 days. And we wrote a book after it was all done about that thick on the experimental results. It was quite a well-done mission. As you know how well efficient the Germans are, they produced on that flight and got a lot of good scientific results that continue to be studied today. But something happened right after that that was pretty unique for me in particular, and that was Ronald Reagan had signed an agreement with Gorbachev to do an exchange program with the Russians. Again, after 20 years since Apollo-Soyuz, they thought that it was a good time to reinvigorate our cooperation after the wall had come down. Let's fly an American on the Mir space station and let's fly a Russian on the space shuttle. So I was between my first and second missions, and everything changed. Suddenly we had Russians walking through the halls of our office there in Houston, speaking Russian and learning English, and we had Europeans that would come and fly occasionally on the space shuttle, but this was a very big change for us. And it put politics fresh into the middle of our technical world, and that was a big change. But looking back on it now, it was an incredibly rewarding thing for me personally, because when I flew F-15s in Germany, we were on 5-minute alert, and I sat many periods of alert. Much like in a firehouse, we had bunks on the top floor and a fire pole to get down to the middle bay between 4 airplanes, and our alarm would go off in the middle of the night, and you throw your G-suit on and go down the fire pole, rush to the airplane, and be airborne in 5 minutes in the middle of the black night headed to the East German border. And many times I'd get up to the border and you'd see the reason we'd been scrambled was because the MiGs had gotten a little too close on the other side, and we'd wag our wings at them and turn and go back home. And here I was in 1994 training to be the pilot on the first docking of the Space Shuttle to go to the Mir space station with guys that had been in East Germany flying MiG-23s, same time I was in Germany on the west side flying F-15s. Now that was weird. So I thought to myself, I'll be darned if I'm going to go fly in space with these guys and not be able to talk to them. So I started learning Russian too. And that's probably one of the more rewarding periods of my life, is looking back on the years hence that I spent with the Russians, learning all about them and recognizing how much their dreams are very much like ours when it comes to flying and going to space and doing new things. So we had established this new program called the Shuttle Mir program, and it expanded. We were going to fly one American to the Mir. He was going to be up there for 180 days, or 100 days I should say, and then we were going to bring him home. Turned out before it was done, we flew 9 missions of the shuttle to the Mir space station. We engaged with them in breathing new life into the Mir. It was in its waning years, and it would have been finished and brought out of space by being deorbited, and it would have disintegrated into chunks in the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean many years before. Had we not joined together, we started flying new equipment to their station on the shuttle. We brought old equipment home. We recycled things for them. And we were flying an American up there about twice a year. And it was the first opportunity that Americans had had to fly on a laboratory mission for long duration since Skylab back in the 70s. So it was a very good, it was very synergistic to have a space shuttle that can carry 50,000 pounds to and from, and the space station there as a destination to go to. It was the real reason for being for the space shuttle in the first place. So I was extremely fortunate in being assigned to fly as the pilot for the first docking in 1995 on my 40th birthday. We woke up and a couple of the gals on my crew pulled me down to the mid-deck where they were preparing breakfast. And the day we dock is what we call rendezvous day. You wake up, from the time you lift off until you dock with the space station is about 42 hours, just the way the orbital mechanics work. And so on that final last 16 hours or so of that 42-hour period, we were waking up and getting ready to close in the last 10 miles of our approach and perform the docking. The 2 women on our crew had prepared an inflatable birthday cake, unbeknownst to me. And it's a very, very busy time when you wake up that day on rendezvous day, because it's a continuous, you're flying for 16 hours, and it's continuously evaluating your trajectory, adjusting it, and getting closer and closer to the space station. So we got up and I went down, and I was still groggy from waking up and having my first cup of coffee, and there they were with this inflatable birthday cake floating sideways in front of me, snapping pictures, singing happy birthday. A couple days later, after all the excitement of the docking wore off, I thought, you know, did I dream that, or did they really do that? I didn't dare ask. I waited till we got home, looked through all the pictures they'd taken, and sure enough, it was real. It was quite the thing, but it was a great way to spend my 40th birthday, was docking with the Russians. And the whole idea was to, you'll see in the show that I'm going to have here with some of the pictures, there was a mechanism that joined the spacecraft together that would not only join and lock them down as one, but there were hatches internal to that mechanism that could be opened to allow us to go to and from. And that mechanism was built by the Russians, a doctor by the name of Siramatnikov, who was around during Apollo-Soyuz and had designed the very same thing for Apollo-Soyuz. And we learned how to take that mechanism, plug it on top of a module that we put into the space shuttle, and there you had the capability to dock the space shuttle with the Russian Mir space station. So I got to do that first mission, and then they asked me to go to Russia and be NASA's representative in Russia for the remainder, for preparations. We had an office over there that was in charge of preparing the remainder of the missions to the Mir. And I did that I lived over there for 6 months, worked hand in hand with the Russians daily out at Star City and at their facilities in the control center in Moscow. Came home and was assigned to fly another mission as commander. It was the middle of the 9 missions. I did the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th flights to the Mir station. And in 1998, I flew the final visit of the shuttle to the Mir and brought the last American home. And about a year and a half after that, they deorbited the Mir, and we began together to work on the International Space Station that is flying today and awaiting the shuttle's return to flight again to be finished. So my short period of 93 to 98, I was very fortunate to fly 4 missions to the space station, or on the shuttle, and 3 of which were to the space station Mir. And I've got some photographs that I'd like to share with you. But the first one, you can see a shuttle in the background. There's an inset here that will play first that has a little video of a launch. And before we kick it off, I thought I'd describe what you're going to see. It's a video that you've seen many times from the outside of a shuttle launch, and that won't be news to you, but it will clip back and forth inside to the view from inside the cockpit of us sitting in our seats, and a view looking out my window as the commander. You will see as we lift off and come out of the plume of smoke that comes around us. You're all familiar with seeing the shuttle do its little turn as it lifts off the pad. You will see the view out the window of that turn, and you'll see the beach below rotating out the window. And then that turn is to align ourselves with the appropriate trajectory to get in the right orbit to go to space. You'll see some of that, and then as it climbs to the end of staging, you'll see the solid rocket boosters come off, and we put a camera on one of the solid rocket boosters that looks across and actually filmed its twin, and you can see the 2 of them tumbling away together as the video ends. So I thought I'd give you that little prelude so you know what it is you're seeing as it goes, because it goes a little bit quickly. Jack, if you would click on the...
I can see it, I'll do it.
Yeah, maybe I can give you a hand with it. There you go, that's it. Okay. You'll see sparklers here go, and that's to make sure that any stray hydrogen gas does not become explosive as the engines light off. It's to avoid a hard start. 6 seconds to warm up the main engines, and then the solid rocket boosters ignite. That's the camera view out my window at the commander's seat. There's 7 million pounds of thrust being produced right there. The vehicle weighs 5 million pounds as it comes off the pad, and here's the roll, and there's what it's like inside. And there's the view out the window as we start that turn, and the beach is below you there, and the sun is rising on the horizon, and we are already passing through about 30,000 feet right there. You'll see as it goes through Mach 1, there's a little bit of a shock wave forming around the vehicle, and this is a view down the nose of the shuttle from the camera on top of the solid rocket booster. See the shock waves moving along the vehicle there? 2 minutes and 9 seconds into the mission, the solid rocket boosters burn out. Each one of those, we build those out here in Utah at Thiokol. Each one produces 3.3 million pounds of thrust. And you can see the camera tracking. They tumble, and then the nose cone ejects and a parachute deploys out of each of them. The whole booster falls in the ocean and is recovered. And Jack, if you would, use the down arrow key. We'll just click through some of these photos now. There you go. This is the first launch of the space shuttle back in 1981. I picked this picture because it's nice to look at. But notice that the external tank was painted white in the original configuration. They decided they didn't need the paint. It weighed a lot and didn't do anything, so they took it off, and that's why today you see the color is a brown burnt orange color, and that's because it's bare foam that tends to become sunburned by ultraviolet. That foam is a tan beige color initially, and then after ultraviolet light is continuously beating on it, you get turned brown, and that's the color we see when it lifts off. As I mentioned, each of the 2 solid rocket boosters on the sides are produced out here at the Thiokol plant out west of Brigham City. They produce 3.3 million pounds of thrust each. The external tank in the middle On the top end of that, top half of that, it holds a 500,000 gallons of liquid oxygen, and underneath it an equal amount in the lower half, a separate inner tank of liquid hydrogen. Those two chemicals are the most powerful liquid propellants that can be mixed, and so they feed through an umbilical the three main engines at the base of the tail of the winged vehicle, the shuttle itself. Each of those little main engines produces 1.5 million pounds of thrust. So the total out of all that is about 7 million pounds of thrust that lifts this thing off the ground. Quite an incredible amount of energy to manage, and when it lights up on the launch pad, as I mentioned, at first we ignite the liquid engines, as you saw in the video, and that gives us 6 seconds to make sure that the engines can come up to full speed and everything's going to be okay. On my very first launch, one of them wasn't okay, and at about, I think it was 3.5, 4 seconds into the startup sequence, we had a valve that was supposed to have closed in the engine bay, and it didn't. The safety system recognized it and shut everything back down right before the boosters lit. And we sat there in this big plume of smoke that you see right before the shuttle emerges out of the plume, except we didn't emerge out of it. We sat there and we aborted on the launch pad, and they had to take a month to pull the engines out, find out what was wrong, and then we went a month later and launched. But what happens during that 6 seconds is, because they're on the tail of the orbiter, they kind of push the shuttle against the hold downs that the solid rocket motors are attached to the launch pad, and the whole shuttle actually teeters forward and then springs back, and they've timed it so that at the 6 second point when they light the boosters, it sprung back to vertical. And the day that we didn't launch, of course the main engines were starting to push it over and the boosters never lit, so for the next 20 minutes while we're trying to figure out what was going on, the whole stack is teetering back and forth. It was quite the deal. That was a bonus. I normally would have had just 4 normal launches, but I had a bonus attempt as well. The shuttle was conceived, interestingly enough, I mentioned that when I flew the first docking of the shuttle with the space station in 1995, it was the 20-year anniversary of the Soyuz Apollo docking back in 1975, and during that mission, President Nixon announced the selection of the space shuttle design. So in 1975, they had chosen and began the final preparations for development of the shuttle, and it finally flew its first mission in 1981. Let's go to the next one, Jay. This is a little bit more in stop motion of what you saw during the movie. As we pass through supersonic, you can see the effect of the shock wave up over the front of the cockpit, on the nose cone of the boosters, and also on the tail. We captured that in stop motion there for you. Take a look at the next one. Once we're on orbit, this gives you a view that is taken from the space station as we're approaching. The crew on the space station was looking down on us as we were climbing up to their orbit. And we're out over the Atlantic Ocean, heading northeast towards Europe. And we're kind of flying formation with the space station. We're about 1,000 feet away from them. They had a little bit of a zoom lens on here, but it gave a great picture of the configuration of the space shuttle. I'm going to take 2 seconds to pull out a laser pointer so I can show you a couple of details.
This picture has some things about the shuttle that most people don't get to see up close and personal, so I'll just take a couple of seconds to show you what those are. This is the docking mechanism that I was referring to that was built by the Russians and attached to our shuttle. And it's the part of the shuttle that will make contact and lock onto the space station. And today on the International Space Station, it's still the same. You see the trusses that are built to attach that to the payload bay. Right here is an antenna that's a radar antenna that we're using to shine at the space station to give us distance away and speed of approach. We actually fly the approach to the space station from the overhead ceiling windows. There's a control stick and a throttle in the back of the back wall, and we actually face the back wall looking out at the docking mechanism because there's another set of windows on this back wall.
and we look up out the top window at the space station as we approach it, and we're flying with our face facing the tail. It's kind of an awkward thing to think about, but when you're flying and you've got references on your target, it doesn't really matter what you're facing as long as you have good references. Attached to the bulkhead here is a tunnel that goes all the way back to this module, and it also connects to the docking port that's in the middle here. And that tunnel allowed us access to this cargo compartment that was holding about 2,500 pounds of cargoes and stores and experiment and clothes and food and whatnot for the crew on board. And we would go in there after we docked, and we'd come bring it down the tunnel and climb up through here to get inside the space station. These doors open when we get on orbit, and we open them immediately because there's radiators on the back side here that inside the panel are long lines of tubing that have freon that is much like a refrigerator, radiates the warm temperature of the avionics and other electronics, and radiates that heat to space and returns cold freon into the air conditioner that cools everything in the cockpit. So these doors are the way that we run our cooling system. Back here we had a very interesting experiment. This was what we called an alpha magnetic spectrometer. It was a huge permanent magnet. Actually, the magnet material came out of the ground in China. This magnet is as big around as a poker table, actually a little bigger, and is tall. It's about as big as a large-sized jacuzzi, actually, and about as tall as 3-4 feet in height. Big donut shape. It had a cover on it here, but big donut shape, and it was a very, very powerful magnet. If you were holding onto a screwdriver and stuck it into the middle of the donut, it would snatch the screwdriver right out of your hand. The purpose of the magnet was to steer cosmic rays. We're outside the atmosphere, so all kinds of cosmic rays that are flying through space, which are magnetic particles, would be steered by this magnet to the base of the magnet, where we had a bunch of computer sensor plates that would detect things like antimatter. And we had a Nobel Prize winning physicist on this team of scientists who were trying to figure out if they could detect real evidence of antimatter. And in fact, they have done so, and now they're expanding the theories that stretch to things like the Big Bang and whatnot, based on information that we collected there. Back on the working end here, this is what we call the engine bay. The 3 main engines on the tail that I talked about earlier, each of those produce 1.5 million pounds of thrust, but we also have 2 very small ones here that we can turn on and off as needed on orbit to adjust our orbit. And then you can see lots of little tiny black spots here. Those are each tiny little thrusters that we use as steering jets, that when we are out in space and we hit the control stick, you don't have any air over your wings. So we have thrusters that respond instead to make it feel like you're flying an airplane, when in fact there's no air around you. Let's go to the next one, Jack. By the way, if you want to sing out a question at all while we're going through this, please do. This is the view out the back windows that I mentioned, and there is that docking mechanism there. And there's the view back through the tunnel of the compartment where we had all of our cargoes. And this docking mechanism has a ring with hooks in it that will mate with the same kind of hooks on the space station. So this is the view I have as I'm piloting the shuttle for its approach. You can see how bright the sun is out there in space, and the beautiful view of the horizon there. Next. This was our target. Matter of fact, being that we were Cold War warriors, we had rehearsed our script. And when we got to about this point, we had to take a break and hold, and we had to talk between us and the crew there and the control centers to make sure everybody was ready for us to come in and make contact. They were passive, we were active in the whole procedure. And we had a script prepared that sounded something like, "Stand by and prepare to be boarded, we're here to take over." And then we had a buddy on board there, Norm Thagard, the only American on board at the time, who had been there 100 days, and you may remember in the news, he wasn't too keen on the food they were feeding him. And we said, "Norm, how much is it worth to you for us to really dock and really bring you home?" But we did. We went ahead and docked, and this is the space station. You see it's kind of a spidery, porcupine-looking thing. It's built around a node. There's a structure here that has many, many attachment points, and they've attached modules to each of those node points. And so this would be kind of the core of the station from which you could enter all the various rooms. Each of these modules is about as big as a school bus. Of course, it's emptied out and configured inside differently for amenities of laboratories or living quarters. This is their little escape capsule. That's the same Soyuz that in 1975, 30 years ago, the Apollo docked with in orbit. So they bring the crews up to the space station in this capsule. It has its own little solar arrays for power, and at any time something goes wrong on the space station, they can jump in that and come home. Next. This is my office at the command post of the Space Shuttle. You can see the cockpit is a lot like an aircraft, but the information we have to work with is quite different. There are many, many more systems than there are in a conventional aircraft because you have to manage being able to fly without an atmosphere. So there are thrusters, there are fuel cells that produce electricity, things that don't exist on a normal aircraft. We have about 10 to 14 days of power, electrical power that's produced by fuel cells, hydrogen and oxygen. You hear all about it these days. To replace gasoline in cars, can we do fuel cell driven automobiles? Well, the Space Shuttle has been using fuel cells since the beginning. We have these big cryogenic tanks in the back of the payload bay that have liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. We flow those into a big battery cell, and oxygen flows past one side of a membrane in the fuel cell, and hydrogen flows past the other. And the membrane allows the fluids to come close enough that an electron will jump across and get on the membrane and be pulled out of the battery as electricity, and the gases come out the other end and join as H2 and water, H2 and O to make water. So we get our drinking water as a byproduct of our electricity generation. Next. One of the things that we do a lot of is assembly and construction in space. This is a photo of a couple of guys doing a spacewalk to attach the new airlock to the space station. This is quite the experience to be able to get in a suit and get out there and float weightless outside your own spacecraft. Next. This is Comet Hale-Bopp, and I flew my third mission in 1997 when Hale-Bopp was visible from the Earth. This photo is actually taken at nighttime. Even though it looks like day on the surface of the Earth, it's a time-lapse photograph. I think it was a 10 or 15 second exposure, and that's why the Earth appears to be streaking. But this is the horizon and the atmosphere. At night the atmosphere glows from ionization and it looks orange. And what's interesting about this picture, because it was time-lapse, you capture what the horizon looks like at night, but it looks like the Earth is in the daytime, and that allowed us to also photograph the comet with the time-delayed photography there.